Hi, welcome to our first podcast, Paolo's Podcast. I am Paolo Dell Aquila. I am the founder of Concussions, Pain, and Mental Health Awareness. We're going to go off script from a typical podcast, and the best way we thought to do this is start off with our first podcast and tell you about my background and history, which will lead us up to our campaign. I'm a former amateur athlete, played football, suffered multiple concussions, and I was an all-state wrestler out of New York, and also played rugby in London. I would say professional punching bag sparring partner in London, as well as I used that as a job and means to pay for my education. We're going to fast forward now. After college, I had several small businesses. And one of the small businesses that was the most successful was a sports performance company I had, where I was very passionate about it because I worked with a lot of children and young athletes, and I helped place over 352 athletes, I believe, nationwide, and that was my goal at that point. So I had to end up usually each athlete to meet their goals. I was, when you do things repetitively and that constant repetition, you could do it like that in a snap of fingers. One day I was writing a program out for one of my clients, and I would just hit glitches. And for a program that would take me maybe like 15 minutes to write for my client, was starting to take like a half hour. And that was my first sign of there was like a little glitch in my memory. And nothing really like that made me worry about it or whatever. I just thought I was under some stress. And then what it started to happen was would be driving. I was down in South Florida at this time. We expanded from New York. I had a division in New York, and I expanded my company, Primetime Sports Training, down to South Florida. And I would be driving through exits. And if you've ever been on the road and you go to get an exit and you're listening to the radio and your mind just drifts off, you miss your exit. That was happening quite frequently, but I was always paying attention to where I was going. So I went into my doctor's office, my primary care doctor, and I did have a little bit of a concern because I didn't know exactly what it was. It wasn't like a painful symptoms. I felt that there was something wrong in my head, and I couldn't really put a finger on it. So I talked to my doctor, but I did have a concern because at that point I was paying attention, and one of my biggest fears growing up was that my grandfather was a fairly young man. He was in his early 70s, and he was 6'2", about 220, really strong old school guy, not bodybuilder, but just worked with his hands a lot. And he had Alzheimer's. And I watched the terrible disease actually eat away this man. So he became a hero that I would actually see deteriorate. And watching that firsthand of a big man that was a skeleton of himself and wasn't my grandfather would put a fear in my soul. So I don't know if I was being a hypochondriac, whatever. I brought this to my attention because I think I read an article where they said that it can be in your DNA and in your genes. Alzheimer's could be hereditary. So I spoke to my primary care doctor with my concerns, where she ran down a little bit of a checklist and said, all right, let's just, follow through with your request. I had insurance at that point. So I went to a neurologist that was in my insurance network. And they really didn't even ask me that many questions while I was there. It was just a quick 1, 2, 3. I told them that I was a former athlete. I had a sports performance company, was one of my businesses. And I was having little slight memory issues, nothing drastic at that point. And so they sent me for an x-ray. The x-ray came back fine. And they said, there's nothing wrong with you. I wouldn't really be concerned. And I started getting some other weird, I would say some time passed by. I get weird ringing in my ears. And so I said, a couple of months went by. I said, to my doctor, I said, something's not right. So we went to a different neurologist. And they said, okay, x-ray would only show a concussion if it's a head trauma injury, or if that's what we're looking for. That'll only show if it was a recent concussion. He said, well, we'll send you for a CAT scan, see if there's any brain tumors or any problem inside the brain. And that came back negative. Now, so I was getting a little frustrated, but I'm not one to run to the doctor for every little aches and pains because over the years when I was an athlete, I abused my body. If you go to Paolo's life story on our website, go through the list of injuries I've had, and my body's like basically deteriorating. When this first happened, I was 5'10" and a half, and now I'm down to 5'7" and a half, and I got arthritis throughout my body, and chronic severe pain almost every day besides the migraines. I went back to my doctor. X-rays came back fine, as I mentioned. The CAT scan came back fine. And now I'm starting to get some headaches, and the pain is getting pretty bad. I'm forgetting a lot about my scheduling with my clients. I used to have to find my system of operations. I would always get calls from my clients and delegate them out to my assistant coaches, and I would keep a lot in my head instead of actually writing it down in a piece of paper in a scheduling process. So I would overwhelm, and I was almost burning my brain out, and I was forgetting clients, and that's a big no-no in my end because I'm a perfectionist when it comes to my work and with the services we try to provide to our clients. I went back to the doctor and my primary care doctor, and she was a sweetheart, but obviously this wasn't her specialty. She said, all right, now it's a memory issue. It's you're not coming to me for the first two symptoms. Let's get a Neuro Psych test. I didn't really know what that was, and she pushed it through. The insurance company rejected it twice, did not want to pay for it. It's a very expensive test. To make it a short description of it, it'll ask you everything from repeating back colors, and I'm also class A dyslexic, so I wanted to make sure I didn't confuse them with my dyslexia of being a crutch or messing up the results of the test. So from there, you go through a variety of tests. The neuropsych test came back and it showed a huge drop in my memory. I guess it was like a baseline of where I was at compared to where my brain should be with IQ. And I knew I was never really the sharpest tool in the shed because of my dyslexia, but I've always been able to adapt to normal life and be successful in business. But I've always found my own pattern to get around things. Where for you to read a book might take an hour, for me, even if I was purely healthy at an early age, it would take me probably like 2 days to read a book. So I was always working with that challenge. So now with the neuropsych test, didn't know what to do. Went back to the neurologist with the information, and he spoke broken English. They spoke very fast. It was hard for me to comprehend a little bit, but he said, what we'll do is we'll send you for an MRI. And at that point, I was in great shape. My shoulders were even bigger than they are now. And I am claustrophobic. He wrote a prescription for an MRI. It got approved through the insurance, thank God. And went to the MRI. I ended up going through, and I said to them, I said, I'm claustrophobic. I'm worried about being put in the sled, which goes into, if anybody's ever had an MRI, you lay in a bed, they slide you through, and then you have to sit in for the period of time for them to do the test and the scan of the brain. Thankfully, I went there ahead of time. They measured me up, and my shoulders didn't fit and decided. And at that time, I was in good shape. I weighed about 220. Okay, so I'm at this point right now. So I didn't, thankfully, like I said, I didn't fit in, and I went ahead to the radiologist. So they told me to go for an open MRI, and they said it would actually be more comfortable for me since I was claustrophobic. This is important information for you, for the audience, anybody that's trying to find shortcuts and coping skills and tips. So I get the open MRI approved. But when I was leaving after at the radiologist, they didn't have an open MRI. And so I had to go to a different location. When I was pulling out of the parking lot, I noticed to the left on the storefront is sports neurology, specializing in headaches, and they had other bullet points, but that's what stood out to me. And since I was a former athlete and I was getting a weird sensation that this might be the right doctor for me since I wasn't connecting with any of the other neurologists, I called up, talked to the front desk, and I told them what insurance I had. And they say, I'm sorry, we don't take your insurance. And I said, listen, I think something's wrong with me inside my head, and I don't really feel comfortable with the neurologist I had. And I said, I'm a former athlete. And then they stopped and they said, well, what we are doing an NFL concussion protocol program. Would you fall in place at that? And I said, well, I didn't make it to the NFL. Went that I wasn't talented enough, but I did play over in Europe. And my benefits would not qualify me to be an NFL player and get any of the benefits of coverage. Being persistent, and this is something we preach through our campaign, is always ask for help and be persistent. Don't necessarily take no for an answer. I stayed a little aggressive and I played a little bit of a pity party, and I really asked him for help because I wanted to find the answers. And I had that vision of my grandfather in the back of my head, and I thought Alzheimer's, I was definitely getting that because these symptoms were coming along. And the physical pain that I was in, I was able to manage that on my own. So they spoke to the doctor and they said, okay, the doctor will come in and treat you. He'll work it out through his case study based on my background. So the first day I went to him, I brought my x-rays, I brought my CAT scans. Immediately he took it out. To the x-ray, threw it off to the side. CAT scan, why did this neurologist order a CAT scan? Turns that way. He goes, okay, this is what I need, an MRI. And he goes, do you have a PET scan? And I said, no, the insurance didn't approve that. He goes, that would have helped us out, give us more indications of what I'm trying to look at related to your brain. But then he looked at the Neuro Psych test. So, and then he did a history of me, and going back on it, I have medically documented I had about 35 concussions through the years playing contact sports, not all through football. Some were through rugby, some were through sparring, some were through wrestling and working private security. So he says, wow, okay. So if you think you've had, and we see here, you documented 35 concussions, he made me understand what a concussion was. And this is important information for parents and for athletes, anybody, is now as we're starting to learn about the post effects and what happens with concussions down the road, is that even when if you're playing a sport and you bang your head and you see butterflies, and we used to call them stingers or so stars for a second, that is really a concussion. You don't have to be knocked out, puking on the side, or migraines. That is definitely one of the symptoms that knows that you have a concussion. But there are a variety of the symptoms, and we get into it further in our campaign of coping skills and being able to get diagnoses and work and ask the doctor the right questions so you can advocate for yourself. So I'm with my doctor, and I know I was like, wow, this is great. He gets it, and he says, all right, based off of this information, there's no cure for what you have. Definitely have post-TBI, which means the after effect, even though it was 20-something years ago since I had my last head injury or concussion. He said he noticed that I had plaque on my brain from the MRI, and I believe the terminology was starburst. It was these bursts of brain cells, but I don't know the actual medical term. And he says, based off of your history, you probably had triple the number of concussions. So you have post-TBI, which is traumatic brain injury. Traumatic sounds very like, okay, you almost died, and that only happened on 2 occasions that I can remember where there were pretty severe concussions. He says that he's actually one of the authorities, and he's one of the very few sports neurologists that has the understanding and the background of CTE. That's the first time I've heard of this word of CTE. I can't remember the actual full medical term of the CTE. It's on our website. He says that, all right, we know you suffer from post-TBI because of the migraines are happening so frequently, and I'm almost 90% sure that you have CTE. But unfortunately, to give you that actual correct diagnosis, with today's technology, we can't get a test that goes deep enough into the brain until you actually are deceased. And we could do an autopsy on the brain and then we could put it on slide. For those parents and people that are not aware of CTE or do not have resources to a computer, it was brought up by one of my board members that I didn't even know about it, and I should know because I was a performance coach and I work with a lot of kids. Is there was Will Smith did a movie called Concussion, and I watched the episodes, and it was wild. It was a real learning experience for me. So there's no cure for that if I do have CTE, but we know we have post-TBI. And if you look at my symptom sheet on the Life of Paolo on my website, you'll see all the symptoms that I go through on a daily routine. I'm in physical pain right now. This is called a mask. I call it my mask. When I'm around people, I try to laugh, put out a good positive energy. And people can't believe that I'm in as much pain as I am. But I try to stay positive. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be a martyr. I just want to do something good and stay in a positive mood and be productive. But unfortunately, tied in with pain, and one of the triggers of pain is depression and other symptoms. And you'll see with the depressions that as my symptoms started getting worse and my physical pain started getting worse, I went to a pain management doctor. The neurologist took care of tried some treatments with me. He did Botox injections in my brain to try to help out the migraines. That didn't work. He did nerve blockers injections. That didn't work. I tried Amovic, which is an injection in your leg that's supposed to stop the migraines. That didn't work. And then we kept on going through this cycle of medications, and it was getting very frustrating. And now through the medications, and I guess I was falling, but I was in denial about it. I was starting to hit depression because my memory now is getting a little bit worse, and I was getting a little bit frustrated. And frustration is another loose word with anger. I wasn't lashing out, wasn't snapping off or having any road rage with people, but internally I was angry. So I was starting to have some mental health issues. And I went to a pain management doctor, and now I started losing my legs. And that wasn't even related to the concussions. I have 4 herniated discs and stenosis of the spine. And because I started putting on weight from the medications, and I wasn't able to exercise the routine that I did. So the poor eating habits, health patterns that I was living in, lifestyle, I was eating like garbage, like we would say comfort foods as we were younger, almost like a food addiction to salts and sweets that would help me put me to sleep. Because when I was sleeping, that was the only time I was out of pain. My neurologist didn't really want me to go into any pain medications. But when I went into the hospital, I had a seizure. Thankfully, I was with my partner and my girlfriend. We were going to a doctor's appointment, and I just went through a full blowout. So it was my first experience with a seizure. I hope nobody really has to deal with it, but my body bowed up. I didn't know about it. I went to like a hallucination. I felt like people were chasing me, almost like panic. These little kids were like chasing me in the car. And I told her, and she's like, didn't know where this was coming from. And all of a sudden, my body spun out, and I went into like a complete bow in the seat. We weren't at the doctor's office yet. We were right near the fire department. When we were at the fire department, she immediately told the doctors that, I'm a former fighter and I'm claustrophobic, so just be careful how you handle him so he doesn't act aggressive or get nervous. And this is very important I think, for me to share with the public, because this is all going to be in a learning curve and hopefully help people, is if she didn't do that, they might have reacted to me differently. And in the state of mind, I wouldn't have had that control, and it could have spun out to be a different type of crisis. So the woman couldn't have been nicest, the firewoman. She calmly, gently down, and now I was coming out of the seizure, and I didn't even know where I was. I was in the trunk. She said, okay, Paolo, you've had a seizure, and we're going to have to strap you in, but I'm right here with you. Don't worry about it. We got to get you to the hospital. And by having that, to her talk to me the way it was, I was able to get control of my feelings and emotions. I was still scared, and they took me to the hospital. So that was my first experience with a seizure. So then obviously this gets reported back to my doctor. So I started going to the pain management doctor, and they tried epidurals for my back and my legs. I could barely walk, and the weight it's coming on because I'm putting on so much weight throughout my body. I started gaining close to 100 pounds within a year, to where I'm at now. I used to be halfway decent looking, and this is the veins part of me right now. It's very uncomfortable for me to be in front of a camera because I just feel disgusting. But I know that this, I believe in my heart, this is hopefully going to help somebody like myself out. So circling back, so they start with epidurals and non-controlled substances because I didn't want to really touch those. I played around with opiates in the past when I was 30, and that's a story for a different time. I was at the point when they went back to the neurologist, and he told me, and unfortunately they said, we can't tell you because it's such a new disease that we're upon. But what's going to happen is slowly your brain dies off. And I might be pitching it wrong, but the symptoms get worse. So they'll go on. As you follow along with our website, you'll see the symptoms because I want to keep you engaged in this podcast. Now I started actually getting really depressed. And I'm just like, I just want to be out of pain. I wasn't able to operate my business because I started getting seizures more often and the pain was bad. So I lost pretty much everything I worked for my whole life. Pretty much all my businesses were gone. And I just felt alone, and I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And I think deep down inside of me, I was already starting to think super dark, and I think I was at a bottom. So I went to the first pain management doctor, and they prescribed me OxyContin. I was like, hey, I was on this before, and went back 3 or 4 times in connection with the OxyContin. They gave me morphine and anti-inflammatories, and I was on those for at least a year and a half, and I was seeing a really good pharmacist. And now the pharmacist that was going was mom and pop pharmacist, and this is where hopefully that you'll get the message through our tips that we'll have on our website and our different platforms, is that I believe that if you have a choice through your health plan, or you can try to go to a mom and pop pharmacist opposed to a corporate pharmacy. The reason why is the customer service. I felt is at the mom and pop pharmacies, they give you that special attention. They know who your mother and father are, your family members. They know your disease or what you're suffering from. So, but that being said, the woman who owned this pharmacy, her name is Sinette, and it's at Jupiter Drugs in South Florida. If you're ever down here and you need a prescription, I recommend you go to her, because this woman kept me alive to today because of one intervention she did. So now she knew what CTE was, which was amazing because none of the neurologists that I went to before, the sports neurologists, ever heard of CTE. I went into the emergency room. They didn't even know what CTE was. None of the emergency room doctors knew what it was. None of the nurses. So when I said I was diagnosed with post-TBI, I have CTE, most likely, they said, what is CTE? Which would make me even more frustrated. So if they spoke very fast, it would be hard for me to comprehend things. And if you're dealing with somebody that has my condition, my cognitive issues were at a problem. So that was very frustrating. And I didn't have anybody in the room with me to take notes or to get instructions. Basically, what they were looking at me is that I was just looking to score more opiates or drug seek. So I had a very negative experience with the doctors from being lack of compassion, their knowledge, and this and that. So my best friend became the pain medication. And that pain medication was my mistress. And like you've heard stories of people with addiction, the opiate crisis, it's a terrible way to live. So my whole day is based upon waking up in extreme pain with migraines, closing the blinds, putting ice packs on my head, just waiting to take my prescription of OxyContin. And that doesn't even cure the migraine, by the way. It would just cure the physical pain throughout my back, my joints, everything else that was coming on that wasn't even contributed to the brain damage that I've received. Now I had an open discussion with the pharmacist and she pulled me in the office, and she said, Paulo, I'm concerned about you, and I said, well, Sinette, I'm just trying to get through today as best as I can because I was more worried about the collateral damage of my disease. At that point, I was thinking about suicide, to be honest. I was actually saying, all right, let me wait. I can handle these symptoms that I have right now, but if they get any worse, there's going to be a time where I just want to go down. And the way I rationalized it was that I love animals and I love people. I have a really passionate, caring heart. I'd rather take pain than have somebody else in pain. One of my closest companions was a service dog that I had, and his name was Brutus, and he was with me as bull mastiff, and we used to work in the pediatric ward when my mother had leukemia. He had heart cancer, and I love this dog no matter what. But at the end of all, so anybody had to put down their own dog, you do it not because you want to do it, but it's humanity. And I know everybody has a different stance on suicide, and whether it's a religious stance or a political stance is just my personal opinion right at that point was that with Brutus, when he was just in so much pain, it was selfish for me to keep him alive at that time. So I put him down. So now immediately my brain was registering to me is that I was thinking of my grandfather and how sad that story was in my head and what my grandmother had to go through to take care of him. And I want to be remembered as the man of Apollo who cared about a lot of my clients and my kids and always wanted, even though I don't have any children of my own, that I care about people and helping people out. I don't want to be at a place, and I don't know at this stage at the game when this disease starts really hitting the next level. But in my mind, I was like, God, I don't know if it's a switch or would alert you. I didn't want to be in like diapers and somebody at nurse's age just wheels me out and I don't know who anyone is. And since I'm young, I'm only 50 years old, and if it deteriorates at a faster pace, that would be the worst thing that I would want to live through. That's for me, from my perspective. So I told her this, and she was actually very concerned. She was very upset, and she was concerned that on the amount of opiates that I was going to overdose. And I said, okay, yeah, I know I can understand that. But really, Sinette, I said, that wouldn't be the worst case scenario for me, because you don't understand the pain I'm in every day, even though I come in here with a smile and I'm limping in with a cane. I don't portray somebody you can feel what's actually happening inside me. I didn't want to be, again, like a victim. So Sinette, like a guardian angel, takes me by the hand, gently walks me down the hallway to Dr. Russell A. Bourne's office, who takes me into the office and leads me in. It's almost like Heaven's Gates. It was a pretty weird experience. So coming meeting me at the door is Dr. Bourne. He just had a positive energy. I had trust issues, and I immediately was always looking over my shoulder, and he said, "Hey, lead the way. I'll tell you how to go there." So I go down the hall. He tells me to make a right. I'm able to make the right. When I'm able to find his office, he sits down. And I immediately start off, I guess, on a negative note. And I tell him, I said, Doc, before we start, I just want to tell you and be honest with you, so I'm not wasting your time. Appreciate you seeing me, but, no one works for free. And I don't have money, unfortunately, and you don't take insurance, so I don't know if this is a bad thing. And he leans back on his couch and with a gentle smile, he said, "Did I ask you for $1?" He says, "So continue. Tell me what's bothering you." Sinette told me briefly what's going on, but nothing in detail. So I continue to go tell him the story. And I really am in a dark place right now. And I said, I've been to psychiatrists before, and I guess one of the topics is that I've had fears of failure in the past, and I don't like to quit. Told him I was a former sports performance company, and when I trained the kids, I used to say, if you quit, it's quitting's like a curse word, so don't ever tell me you quit. But and I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And I said, I really don't know how to breach this next subject because I know there's laws and regulations with a doctor. So maybe you could coach me on how to do this so I'm not putting you in a bad position, and I'm putting myself in a bad position. I want to know how I should word the topic so maybe you could give me some advice or guidelines. And he looked over my case file and all the documentation. He says, wow, you've been through a lot. Your body's pretty beat up. And I said, yeah. I said, that's saying like the least. I said, suicide has been part of my thought process we're going through right now. And I actually had a discussion with my parents. I think it was like 2 weeks prior to that. My memory recalls, because this is going back 2 years. I sat down with my parents once I was diagnosed with my disease, told them how bad my symptoms are. And they've been through so much. Our family's been through a lot of personal issues and health issues. My mother's a recovering AML leukemia patient. Thank God she's still alive today. My father's a Viking, takes care of the house. And my sister's had her health issues. I didn't want to be an extra burden on them, but I talked to my dad, and I tried to calmly come to them as a point of not being impulsive, but make them understand where I was at. So if the day and time comes and I decide to have an exit strategy, which is a kind word of saying suicide, I said, how do I touch on this subject and get some advice from you? So he put it in words on how we could communicate. This is a good, actually, point for anybody that's listening, since suicide is on the rise and everybody goes through a lot of pain, and I can never put myself in anyone else's shoes, is to talk about it. And don't be afraid to talk about it. This is where he gave me a coping skill. And we call it the 3-day rule. And say not to commit suicide, and he didn't say to commit suicide. But he told me, he said, do you know what happens with suicide? And I said, yeah, with my luck, I'm going to jump off a bridge and I'm going to end up landing and I'm going to break every bone. I'm going to be a paraplegic and I'm not going to die. And so we both laughed. And I said, that's one of my fears, is following through with it and making it be as peaceful and gentle as it possibly could be. So he says, well, we're not at that point yet right now. We don't have anybody that really could tell a story about suicide. So I think this platform and our campaign could help a lot of people. But it made me understand what happens to the mind. And usually, I guess through his experience, worked for the CIA for 24 years. So he had a different level of education and could really communicate with people who've been through a lot of trauma. And immediately, I don't know if it was those words, but I'm impressed by certain people's experience and knowledge. I like to say, on one hand, I don't judge people, but I would say when I come across with somebody with some serious intelligence and I screen, and even though I said I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, when I spot somebody that's pretty sharp, I pick up on it pretty quick. I knew that I had something here, so whether it was just going to be this one visit, I wanted to take advantage of it. And he told me something. He says, once anybody commits suicide, it's an impulsive reaction. So you're in a lot of pain, Paolo, today, and obviously I could see that the way you walk in here. Your medical records obviously document it. You're on a tremendous amount of pain medication that I can't believe you're on. That would kill an elephant, but obviously you're a big guy, and you've built up a tolerance, so you're here today. But when anybody goes to do it, it's impulsive. So once you commit suicide, whatever format you use to take that action, is you can't take that back. So let's think about this. Now, you're in a lot of pain today. So what I would recommend, and you could do this as a homework assignment, because I believe in my own heart right now, the way you're able to articulate and be able to communicate right now, your time is not today. I'm not saying what's happening next month or next week or anything like that, but he says, give yourself some time and let's talk about it. And then basically buy some time. And he says, can you do that? And I didn't even say yes at that point. And I said, well, so what's the homework? What's the end game? Because obviously I was being a little bit suspicious in my trust. I was saying, well, obviously the doctor, if he's a good doctor, he's not going to talk me into committing suicide. So what's his angle? So if you're in pain is what's making you want to commit suicide, or the deterioration of you having the vision of yourself being a parasite on your family and being in diapers, not knowing anybody, and being a skeleton of yourself is a fear factor. You're not in diapers right now. Be able to articulate and function somewhat. You're not doing the same things that you used to do, but you're not there yet, right? And I said, no, I'm not in diapers. I could wash myself, take care of, eat, cook for myself. So I'm halfway independent, but I've lost everything financially. And he goes, I'm not even caring about that. I work with people on Wall Street that have lost money. That's one thing. That's a separate topic for a different day. The pain issue, okay, where's your pain at today, right now? And when's the last time you took your medicine? I said I took it about an hour ago. I'd say it's about maybe, I always want to say it's a 10. He says, come on, I looked at your record. You told me about all the sports you played and stuff. And he goes, I'm not going to say dismiss your pain and make it anything, but he says, give me a real honest a number, because you probably have a pretty high pain threshold. And understand the difference between your physical pain and your emotional pain. And that was key. And I was like, all right. And it made me think for a second, because depression was adding like 2 points in my head, and the physical points were at a higher level. So if I separated the two, if this makes any sense, is I said, I came up with the number of, say, I'm probably like at a 7 right now, my physical pain. And he says, okay, you're at a 7. You're not at a 10. He goes, I want 3 days to go by. I want you to chart and be honest with your pain. And if it goes up to a 10 or 11, it gets where, keep a chart of it. But let's see where you are in 3 days. If you still are at a 7, we'll have a conversation and I'll tell you something. Maybe I'll agree with you and say, okay, let's find a different way to manage your pain or a different way to go about it. But let's not think about the worst case scenario. We're talking about ending everything, because again, once you commit suicide, there's no coming back, and there's nothing else you can give through. He said, can you man up and can you step up for 3 days? That's a rule of thumb, because with even people with depression, they say, oh, the common person will be like, snap out of it, or they'll make light of it. But until you're in that person's shoes, you can't just snap out of it. These are diseases, and it's a national crisis going on right now. And mental health is, people got to understand and be more compassionate about it and understand it. And that is finding different coping skills to work within those symptoms. So I'm not saying I'm going to be able to cure your pain, but if we could find a way to manage it, just like when you worked with your athletes, if you had to get them stronger, I'm sure you gave them different type of exercises. So he started to relate to me in my world, that made it speak to me in my language. And immediately this was huge. It's just like, I guess as a golfer, is like, I can't play golf. My dad's a Hall of Fame golf coach. He teaches somebody to swing a club. That person can understand who's trying to play that game, well, actually swing the club correctly and improve their game. So my goal is not to find a cure, but to treat my symptoms, okay? So I said, it's worth a shot. So I gave it 3 days. And I went there and checked it. Had a miserable night. I thought it was, but I was actually left there with a little bit of a pep in my step, because here's somebody, and this is important, why I said you should seek out help, professional help outside. And there's nothing wrong with reaching out to family members if you're in a crisis, or reaching out to help or something. But those who love you and really feel there, they fall in your pain. So if you are my son, my daughter, my mother, father, and you tell me how bad you're feeling, all right, I want to fix you. I want to feel that pain. I'll be up all night worrying about you. Where Dr. Bourne is used to, he's trained in this point, so he could cut off that connection. So I don't have to go to bed with guilt on my sleeve and feel all this stuff that's happening in my life. And he could just check out. Where if I was finding this conversation with my parents, all they're going to do is worry at nighttime and think the worst. And that is very selfish of me. So this, I felt like, all right, this is something positive, and I'm about being proactive. So 3 days come, I go back to Dr. Bourne. I say, honestly, I think I'm at a 7 still. And he goes, all right, so you're not any worse, right? And he goes, I can't tell you what to do. When you leave here, I don't know what you're going to end up doing. But my honest opinion is you're not ready yet. And this is another coping skill, what you want to do. And like, I would love to have you come into my office today and tell me, hey, your pain was a 6. But you know what? You didn't tell me it was an 8 either. And it didn't get any worse. And you're here today. All right. So if you would have went and left my office and not followed and somebody gave you guidance, you would have pulled the trigger and missed out of 3 days. Now, what'd you do in those 3 days? So I said, I just stayed with my same routine, got up out of bed, I took a shower, I ate, I took my medicine, went right back to bed. And he goes, all right. He goes, now what that's going to end up doing is you don't have structure. And we all need a purpose in life. He goes, your whole life you've been a workaholic, and you enjoy what you do. You enjoy helping kids and you enjoy helping people, and that's your purpose. And as human beings, we need to be productive. We can't just sit and isolate. I said, I know, I said, I can understand that. And he says, and everyone's afraid to talk about these subject matters, of depression because of being labeled as crazy or throwing a pill down your throat. There's not going to be a quick fix, and I'd be lying to you if there is. So he said, you have to find a purpose. And this is one of the coping skills I'd like you to try is, since you're such a go-getter and you do things, and I would tell this to any patient, is whether, it's helping somebody else or doing an art project and giving that project to somebody, your mother, or writing, keep a journal of everything that goes on in your day. He goes, you like to write, because I told him about my dyslexia. And I said, I have terrible grammar, but I love writing. I'm very visual and telling stories. He goes, well, that's great. He goes, that'll help you keep memory, keep a journal of everything that's going on. So if you ever have blackouts and your memory starts really going bad, then you could look back and reflect on those things, and those memory tools will help you out. Second is come up with some type of program, and I can't tell you what it is. You have to find out what you're going to do and give to the world, give something out. And it's like, probably the best terminology or use of words would be like charity. But don't do charity to get a pat on the back and get rewarded. So everyone says, oh, okay, there's this guy that's is going through a lot of pain, and he's feeding the homeless, and he wants people to feel sorry for him. And I said, well, that's not me. That's not my style. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be a martyr. I just want to have relief. So he says, okay. He says, well, are you willing to try this? Can you do this? Do something like that? And I said, well, I don't know what to do, So I go home, and he sets up an appointment. Now, this man is one of the top, like I said, one of the top psychologists. So I am being blessed, but usually he's quite expensive. So he tells me to come back again the following week. And so now he's seeing me within 2 weeks, he's seeing me 3 times. He tells me, he says, what'd you come up with? I said, well, I'd like to share my experience and to people that don't know how to answer and don't have the resources to maybe tell my story to get them through. And the subject matter is how I'm dealing with right now, the symptoms and some of the stuff I'm embarrassed about. I'm embarrassed the way I look. I said, and he says, well, that could be changed, right? If we eat cleaner, if we eat healthier, we exercise, even though you got some, obstacles and you can't move that well with your back, we could get that on track, right? And he goes, you could share this and journal this and find a way. I said, well, I think maybe I'd like to do a non-for-profit. He says, well, that's a big endeavor. It's not, people say that. And I said, no, I understand. I said, but I'm a startup king. I've started up several businesses, and I'm either go big or go home. So that's how I really started to end up working on this campaign. And it started 2 years ago. And then it started getting overwhelming because the reasons why I couldn't work so hard with my businesses was because of my symptoms, right? And their building. And I also, too, was a little bit afraid of some of the symptoms. And I hear voices in my head, I get ringing, And if I go and I communicate and tell people I'm going to be judged, people say that person's crazy. And he says, well, do it from the purity of your heart and let's see where it comes out to be. He says, he goes, figure 3 pain points that not only they could reach a larger demographic. All right. So I said, well, I think that, maybe I'll do, now that I've been doing research on CTE and I saw the Will Smith movie and I have an understanding, and I love sports, maybe I'll form a CTE support group so athletes can learn all the time and energy I spent to try to get answers. No one was giving me any type of direction. So I'll try to end up forming that. And then we pause. He goes, I like it. He goes, that would be really good. I said, well, you know what, though? What about all the kids that I work with that are dealing with emotional problems and stuff? How many kids do you get in? And I started bouncing ideas off of him, almost as a business manager now instead of a psychologist. And he says, he goes, to be honest, he goes, you're one of my only athletes I have in here that has come to me with this condition. So he goes, obviously mental health is a huge, broad subject. So I said, all right, well, if I'm going to do this and that demographic's large and there's different techniques and coping skills that you could help me with, and if you're willing to help me, I said, I would love to take you up there and ride this wave as long as I can. And then if it comes to that point where I'm at that deterioration point, I'd like to have an exit strategy and be honest with you and to come. And we made an agreement and a pact, and he says, okay, I'll put the time, I'll put the energy in with you. I'll join your board. I'll be a consultant and, you'll be one of my patients. If it comes to and you hit a real low in a day and I invest this much time in working with you, Paolo, I don't want money. He goes, I want you to reach out to me before you do it. And I said, I can do that. I'm a man of my word. If I give you my word, I'll step up. And he goes, all right, I think this is a special thing. You could do it. Before you knew it, I had a platform, a pro forma together, business plan, and he was blown away because he's never seen somebody work as fast as I did. And we started doing demographic research. I reached out to one of my former clients that I trained for a long time, and his name is Alexander Dwork. I told my father what I was doing, and now I actually say that this campaign, my pain is still there, like I said, and this you can't see it because I'm wearing my mask. But the coping skill and me having a purpose in life to get out of bed and partner up with my little brother Alex and to come over and share something and keep on a schedule where he's doing the checks and balances with me is keeping me moving in a forward direction. And I'm not saying that this is a cure or an answer for everyone, but it's really been helping me big. This is pretty much the story of how concussions, pain, and mental health awareness has been born. And our next podcast, I'm going to go over things that have worked for me, from my opinion, and things that haven't. And also to remember that, these are coming from me, that I'm not a professional and I'm not a doctor. So that's what Dr. Bourne was actually telling me. And I'll briefly touch on the one subject since I touched on suicide, is that I was concerned when I had this campaign come along. I had a call one night from a young man that wanted to commit suicide. And I grabbed the phone. I didn't know how he got my number. And I was afraid to take the call because I was afraid I was going to say something wrong that could trigger it and add to the thing. And everyone sues everybody this day. And I got nothing, no assets anymore, so there's nothing really you could sue for me. But I was more worried about doing damage because I'm not educated, I'm not a specialist. And he did tell me something which we use in our tagline today. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. Even though every day I don't watch the news and I keep away from certain triggers, the world's getting sadder and more depressing, right? We could look at it that way. But reach out for help and you'll be surprised what comes into your life, and be a good person. And if you do those things, good things happen. And he said, I asked him, I said, I spoke to this young man and I thought I did the right thing. I picked up the phone. I didn't really give him medical advice. I just told him my story and what to do. And then I asked him, I said, even though I didn't know where he lived or where he was, I said, after you get off with the phone with me, please make a promise to yourself as well as me, since we don't know each other, to reach out to a professional and suicide hotline and seek help, see where it takes you, and get that advice, because that's very important with our campaign. Is if we say something and I give you 10 suggestions and maybe only one of them connects with you as a family member or a friend or something else, then we did something good as a community. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys on our next Apollo's podcast. And I hope you enjoy our campaign, and I keep your attention.